today is going to be focused mostly on tournament strategy and really short stack when playing out of the blinds. Does anyone already feel like relatively comfortable or know what they're doing when they're playing out of the blinds, like big blind or small blind? Because this is generally where I see a lot, or like most of the mistakes, especially over like last few weeks from like recreational players. But yeah, actually I'm curious, like has anybody like really studied like playing out the blinds, like small blind or big blind in a tournament format? No. Okay. I mean that's good. So that means that you should hopefully learn a lot today, and this is going to be incredibly important and common, especially later on in tournaments, because most of the time, like 80% plus of the hands you're going to be playing are largely going to be out of the blinds. I mean, maybe not necessarily 80%, but a lot of the hands you're going to be playing are out of the blinds because you're just going to be folding a ton, especially as you're shallow and there's really high ICM implications. So yeah, let's jump into it. We'll start off with, if this will work. Okay. First, playing out of the big blind. And this is where most of your play is going to be in your entire tournament life. And you're generally going to be wanting to defend pretty wide, but knowing how this changes depending on stack depths as well as depending on positions is going to be really important. And so today we're actually going to be looking at a bunch of charts, which I know generally is not super fun, but I think it'll really illustrate kind of the differences in the ranges. And you guys know what the boundaries of those are so that you can kind of like extrapolate and then understand roughly what kind of ranges you're supposed to be playing. But generally, when you're playing out the big blind, you want to be defending really wide, especially in tournaments where there's the ante format, where it just really incentivizes you and gives you a great price to want to see a lot of flops. And this becomes more so as stacks get shallower. So unlike cash games where you're usually at 100 big blinds, you're going to be folding your big blind at a decent rate. There's no ante format. You're less incentivized necessarily to call out the big blind. Whereas in tournaments, you're much more incentivized to want to defend your big blind. And really, a big thing is positional disadvantage is obviously a huge part of poker in general. But as stacks get shallower, the disadvantage of being out of position becomes less relevant because you're just going to have a lot of moments where you're actually going to be jamming out of the big blind, especially when you're 20 big blinds or less. So you're not going to have actually much post-flop play, or you're maybe going to call the big blind and then you hit a pair and you started with like 15 big blinds and you're just supposed to get it all in no matter what. So either you check, they bet, you just jam all in, or you check, they bet, you call one street, and then you check again on the turn, they bet, and then you go all in. Either way, like when you're that shallow, you hit one pair, you're pretty much just, you're going to want to get all of the money in. Generally speaking, and this will be kind of like the more counterintuitive piece of big blind play, is you actually really want to tighten up in multi-way pots as opposed to playing more. And it's counterintuitive because your price is generally going to be better. You only need to call one big blind more versus like maybe there's 7 or 8 big blinds in the pot. But you lose so much equity share, and ranges, especially in tournaments, tend to be tighter, especially if there's somebody open and then somebody calling a late position. So it becomes pretty actually shitty to defend with a normal range of hands that you would be defending without the big blind. So you're actually going to generally want to play tighter. So let's say like under the gun opens and cutoff calls and it folds around 2 in the big blind. Instead of defending like a typical range, which let's say might be like 70 to 80% of hands, that's going to drop to something like 50 to 60% of hands just by virtue of the cutoff calling here and now being multi-way. And then we talked about stack zones before in tournaments where generally speaking, you're going to want to have jams, and that starts when you're like roughly around 10 to 12 big blinds or less. But when you're playing out the big blinds, when you're playing on either of the blinds, you start to see this at basically 20 big blinds or less. So this is actually a pretty decently sized like deviation from normally what your jamming range would be when you're playing out the blinds. Okay, we're going to start looking at some ranges, but any questions on this? Any of these seem confusing or any terminology that's new to folks? No? Okay. So I'll start with what percentage do you guys think you should be, let's say we're 100 big blinds deep, under the gun opens, what percentage of our range or what percentage of hands do you think we should be defending from if it folds around to us in the big blind?
60%?
60%, okay. Cool. So yeah, 60%. Anyone else think differently?
Probably go 70.
70%. Okay, 70, 75%. Do you guys feel like you defend somewhere between that raise, 60, 70, 75% in
Probably
game?
feel like you defend more than that.
I was gonna say
Yeah, probably defend more.
Almost like 90%.
Interesting.
defense.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's take a look. So, actually, so big blind versus under the gun. So you guys are probably way overdoing it in terms of defending. So I know I said generally defending a lot more. 54% is still relatively high. And position is going to matter a ton. You're going to see how this changes with position. But when you're defending versus under the gun versus when you're defending versus late position, that makes a big difference. And also because we're pretty deep, that also impacts it. But big blind versus under the gun looks more like a 54% like defend range, where your prominent strategy here is just going to be calling. You're going to still want to be 3-betting with mostly like your premiums, obviously like your best hands. And then some of your suited broadways. You're gonna mix in some bluffs like 9-8. Like most of your bluffs are coming from these suited connectors, and this is actually a pretty big shift. When you're deep, a lot of your bluffs are gonna be coming more from like your suited connectors, because these hands can benefit a lot from like flopping straights and flushes and making the nuts on a lot of boards. But as you get shallower, you're gonna see a lot fewer of these in your 3-betting range because they just have less playability when you're deep. You don't get to go like triple barrel bluff on like on a flush draw board or a straight draw board because you're just not deep enough. You maybe only have like 2 streets that you can bet. So most of your 3-betting is going to be condensed more to like your high equity hands, like your pocket pairs, and then more of the stronger like broadways as opposed to these suited connectors. But when you're 100 big blinds deep, just know that you can pull from like 9-8 suited, 7-8 suited, 7-6 suited as your 3-bet bluffs. And then of course you got some of your like classic like ace-5, ace-4 suited. Any questions on this? Okay. So we're going to kind of look at like the same position, big blind versus under the gun. Yeah, Derek?
Like, if I have like jacks, and it seems like weird that the raise percent seems so small with jacks. Do you have any insight as to like why, even like 10s, jacks, queens, why it's not just saying raise 100% of the time?
Yeah, it's a great question. Largely, this is largely due to the fact that we're playing against under the gun. So this is where position really matters, and the under the gun range is going to be really pretty tight. Like the under the gun range is typically raising something like 15% of hands, 15 to 18% of hands, right? Like, so, I mean, of course they're going to have some of these like pocket pairs, like maybe like 5s or 6s plus that are going to be raising. But even with a hand like 10s and jacks, like we're dominating, like you always want to think about like how many hands are we dominating? How many hands are like dominating us? And then how many hands are we kind of like flipping against? So like against the under the gun range, if we have like, let's say 10s, they're going to raise jacks, queens, kings, aces 100% of the time. So we're dominated by all those hands. We beat when they have 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s. So it's kind of a wash in terms of the hands that we dominate versus the hands that dominate us. And then there's a bunch of hands that we're kind of flipping against. So because of that, it's like somewhat neutral, right? Like we're almost dominating and we're dominating an even amount of hands, which is why like, it's just like, okay, when it's neutral, we don't have a significant equity advantage here. Like let's just play call because we're out of position. We're playing against a strong range and just play it more passively. It still obviously does mix in some 3-betting, but you just don't have that much of an equity advantage against an early position raise.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hey guys, welcome. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
this might be a really stupid question, but why is like ace-5 suited better than like ace-6, for instance?
Yeah, ace-5 suited is generally better and preferred as kind of like 3-betting. One, because it has the properties of like making the wheel straight, so you can hit like a straight like 2, 3, 4. Also, it benefits from getting more like you benefit a lot when you raise with something like ace-5 suited and you get like ace-6, ace-7, ace-8, ace-9, ace-10, like those hands all fold, hands that were beating you and dominating you pre-flop. So that's why they pulls from some of these lower ones because there's more hands like because they're going to raise all those suited, a lot of those suited aces from under the gun, and most of them, I mean, a lot of them will be folding.
Okay.
Yeah. So largely that, but it's really because you've got the straight draw potential, which is better than a6, and then there's more hands that can kind of like fold out, which is like a great result for you. Cool. Okay, so we'll look next at, so you'll see kind of like at 40 big blinds, it doesn't, so the actual number of hands that you play doesn't change too much. So you'll notice you're at 54% VPIP at 100 big blinds. You're at 54% VPIP still at 40 big blinds. But what does dramatically change is the hands you're choosing to 3-bet with. So this is that property that I was mentioning, which is like when you're deep, you're pulling a lot more from these like suited connectors. But as you get shallower, you're seeing that now like tens, jacks, like these higher equity hands, you're choosing to like condense your 3-betting range to hands that just have more immediate equity, as opposed to like your suited connectors, and just it's just because you don't really get as much playability post flop when you're shallow. So that's the main difference when you start to get shallower, that you'll notice you're really not 3-betting as much with your suited connectors. But otherwise, still playing about a 54% range. Otherwise, this mostly looks the same. I mean, you're starting to mix in now. Now instead of pulling from your suited connectors, you're starting to pull from like your offsuit, like your some of these like offsuit hands as kind of your like your bluffs. And this is where blocker properties become also more important, because when you're holding the ace x, the king x, etc., you're blocking their aces, kings, ace king, etc. Okay. How do you guys think this changes as now we go like 40 big blinds or less?
It looks like those like jacks and tens, as you were speaking on before, now are just like raising all the time, because there's no incentive to like really kind of set mine or anything. You just want to realize your equity, I guess, right away, because you're getting shorter stacked.
Yeah, and also I think a big thing as well is these hands are like good enough to get all in for 40 big blinds. Whereas at 100 big blinds, you feel really uncomfortable getting all the money in with jacks and tens. Like you 3-bet, they 4-bet, like you don't really want a 5-bet shove for like 100 bigs, it's just too much. Like queens plus is good enough that you're like, whatever, they have kings, aces, they got me. But like jacks and tens are pretty uncomfortable to get in for 100 bigs, but for 40 bigs, yeah. Like you can get it in. Like you 3-bet, maybe they 4-bet, you could just 5-bet rip it. They might just 4-bet all in themselves. So, yeah.
Like seeing this, would you actually rip queen jack suited?
Yeah. So this is like, there's always like this interesting part of like solvers, which is like, okay, they have like some really, it's like when I look at something like this personally, and you see like 0.1% all in. Honestly, I personally ignore it because I try to simplify strategies, and I'm like, am I going to remember that I'm supposed to rip it with queen jack suited like 10% of the time? I'm just not, personally. So I just ignore it. Like, it'll choose, to mix in to try to create this like perfectly balanced strategy, but I would just recommend you kind of just ignore that and just play this as like a pure call, personally. Yeah, but good question. Like, you'll see a lot of this in like solver strategies, is they'll like pull like random ones, or like they'll fold like, I don't know, like all these ace-x, but then choose to like jam with like ace-6 off or something specifically. It's a bit weird sometimes, but yeah. How now as we go to like 20 big blinds and shallower, how do you guys think this range changes?
I think it condenses into a lot more 3-bet and all-in strategy, and it tightens up into that range.
Cool. So you think okay? So first off, how do you think it affects the VPIP? Like that number of hands that we're playing. Do you think that goes up or down as we get shallower?
Down, right?
I think it'll actually go down, but your all-in frequency is going to increase, in your 3-bet. Well, I think 3-bet will just be gone, because your only option is going to be to jam against to defend.
Yeah, as you get super shallow. So you think VPIP goes down, and you think basically all-in and 3-bets are going to go up. Cool. And then I heard some people thought that VPIP will go up as you get shallower. So let's take a look. So VPIP actually starts to go up, and this was kind of what I mentioned at the beginning, which is like as you get shallower, you're going to want to actually start defending wider. So this is actually where I've seen like some recreational players is they'll actually, as they get shallower, they actually just start to like play like tighter, and then try to and as well they think that they can only like be like all in or fold. So they're trying to like pick their situations, but you'll see here you still have actually to your point, like what went from like a 0.1% all in, now you've got 6% all in. You definitely have actually fewer raises now percentage wise, because actually more of them are getting condensed into the all in, especially at 20 bigs. But you still have a significant calling strategy. Yeah. Now you get to call a lot more, and you'll see where most of that is concentrated is like you're literally playing any suited hand. So this is actually really important. Like the properties of like suited cards are really great for defending your big blind. You basically, if you see a suited hand in the big blind, like you should just never be folding. You should always defend your big blind. The only exceptions is if it becomes like multi-way, like under the gun opens, middle position calls, button calls, and then you have like 6 deuce suited or 10 deuce suited. Like you can start folding some of these junkier suited hands. But if it's just one razor, and you're like, and generally speaking, you're always gonna be playing like less than 40 bigs for the most part in the tournament, then you're almost always you're always defending your suited hands. So that's one big takeaway. But then, yeah, what do you guys think about like the hands that we're supposed to be jamming with here? What do you guys notice?
A lot more pairs.
Yeah, a lot more pairs. What are the bluffs that we're pulling from?
Like, is the intention to trap with kings? Aces? Why
Yeah.
not rip it?
I mean, basically, yeah, exactly. Is like 20. It's like you're taking like your literal like best hands, and it's like pretty like polar. So your three betting, your non all in 3-bet strategy is extremely polar here. So you're gonna be raising with aces and kings, and then you'll find like you're gonna start picking some of this like offsuit stuff basically to mix in as your bluffs. And then I guess it chooses ace queen suited sometimes, but and mixes. But yeah, is that you're basically like trapping, and so you have a polarized like 3-betting strategy, and then your all-in strategy is largely going to be like condensed with these pairs, and then it's just choosing some of these like suited hands like king 10 suited, ace 5, ace 4 as like the bluffs that it mixes in. But you'll notice that generally it's very tight. Like this is like a 6%, or like if you combine raise and like all in, it's like, yeah, like 9%, raising strategy. And then, again, that's a function of just like the under the gun is supposed to be like really tight here. So we can't just kind of like go crazy with the hands that we're raising with. Yes.
Would you, oh, sorry.
Yeah, notice with the all-in strategy state, you also add the ace 5, ace 4 suited sometimes. I've always wondered, like, why is that? Is it you're doing that as a bluff? That is as a bluff?
Yeah,
With
yeah, I think
blockers?
John, you just added, but yeah, exactly. These are like the classic like bluff hands, because one, you block, like you want to have an ace in your hand because you block hands like aces, ace king, which is going to be their best hands that they're going to snap call you with. But then two, even if like you get called, like you can still like hit a flush, you can hit a straight. You've got like reasonable equity to try to like suck out against even their best hands. So yeah, that's why you'll see a lot of those like mixed in. It's like the classic bluffs.
Yeah, good setty bluffs that can catch.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
Okay, would you simplify this? Basically just say, this is what I'm ripping. I know I can raise with aces and kings and just ignore all the rest of the chart as just a call? Or would you actually
You mean ignore
raise...
ignore all of these ones?
Yeah.
I would personally, I would raise with aces and kings. I would pick one of these, and I would just say like, let's just say I pick a7 off, and I'm just say every time I have a7 off, I'm gonna 3-bet it pure, and then I'm just gonna call with all the rest of these. So I'm basically gonna condense like all of these like little snippets into one combo, and then I just choose a7 off. I probably ignore the ace queen suited. I probably just flat with ace queen suited. So I kind of condense like all my 3-betting. I just choose a7 off as like my 1 3-betting combo, and then I raise with aces and kings.
So
My 3-betting bluff combo.
So your frequency effectively stays the same on your percentages. It's just the range is condensed into one
Yeah,
pair.
I just reduce the number of combos that I need to think about. Is how I personally do it. I think everyone does it a bit differently. Some people just feel like they just might remove 3-betting from their strategy here, and they'll just be like, okay, I don't need a or they'll just like basically still jam with aces and kings, and then maybe instead they'll add like ace 3 suited or queen jack suited as well as like in their jamming range, and then not worry about this offsuit stuff and just play those as pure calls. There's different ways you can do it, but yeah.
And if you raise,
Yeah.
and someone then puts in all in against you, would you call it or fold it?
Yeah, so the beauty of this polarized 3-betting strategy is it becomes very clear what you want to do when you get 4-bet. When you have aces and kings, you snap call. When you have this junk, you snap fold. So it's a very simple decision if you get played back against. Yeah. Cool.
Or if it's ace jack, can you fold? What?
If you decide to raise as a bluff, like you see how there's like a little slight shade of red, because these are all like your bluffs that want to balance when you 3-bet with aces and kings. If somebody's gonna 4-bet jam on you, you're like basically dead when you have any of these. These were all your bluffs. So if they're re-raising against you all in, then you just snap fold.
What
Yeah.
about sevens and fives? Are you calling the 4-bet?
Well, we're I guess because you're saying okay, we're 3-betting here with sevens and fives. So what I personally do, and this is kind of weird because it's like okay, why are we jamming with fives and like not jamming with sixes? This
Yeah,
is like one of those like really weird situations. Honestly, I personally probably just like simplify by knowing that I just jam fives plus. I probably don't even mix them into my 3-betting strategy, to be honest. Yeah, so I personally wouldn't have the situation where I like 3-bet sevens and then now have to think about what I'm doing against a 4-bet. Yeah, at least that's what I personally do. So I haven't actually studied this spot much, which is like what happens you 3-bet here and you get 4-bet. Yeah.
I mean, jamming
Just if you
with fives in that position, you're effectively blocking any low straights that are coming out. You've already taken 2 of the cards out of the play from anything that's going to be lower, so either 2, 3, 4, 4, 6 or anything like that, right? So it has a little bit more equity than say sixes.
Yeah, well, I don't think that's like the main driving property behind that, because your opponent is not going to have a lot of those, like, when they're raising, they're not really having a lot of these low cards, so blocking those, it doesn't, it's not as valuable in this case. But to be honest, I don't know why. I don't know why exactly is, but this is just like one of those weird spots that the solver chooses fives over sixes.
Maybe it's because ace 5 suited is a big bluff from like maybe like an undergun. Like I would raise ace 5 suited under the gun, and then you know if you have fives, you'd be like, okay, well maybe he doesn't have ace 5 suited, so. Actually, wait, that doesn't really make any sense.
No,
I said it out loud. I just take it back.
It's because of full house logic. So aces full of sixes is the worst full house, right? Because aces and twos can go on to make a straight flush. There's like some math in there that sixes are the worst.
I would jam sixes here.
I mean, honestly,
from full house perspective.
From a full house perspective.
I don't even think it's worth really understanding why, because it's, like I think, and this is the part where like you really have to kind of take a bit grain of salt on these like solver strategies, and this is the part where there really is a lot of like, there's a lot of still edge to be gained in poker because a lot of people can look at this and interpret different things. And like most of my study with my coach is honestly like looking at charts and being like, okay, now like what the fuck do I do when I'm here? Like when I look at this, because like I'm not gonna know that I'm supposed to call 10% of the time with 8-5 off. So it's really about how do you choose to simplify, which is why I at least I personally don't spend too much time thinking about this, and I just try to make some like adjustments and just like summarize kind of like how I would play this range for myself. Okay.
One last question. How
Yeah.
drastically does this 75% VPIP change in ICM spots? Like,
Yeah. ICM, it'll be largely driven by stack sizes, so there's no like blanket statement, but generally speaking, you're going to be wanting to play, I mean, depending on your stack size. So if you're a larger stack, if you're a big stack, it's going to increase. Whereas if like you're a middling stack, like let's say you're around like 20 big blinds, which effective stack size here, it's probably really going to tighten up. So you're going to actually probably be folding, I mean, a lot of this offsuit stuff, for example, you're going to like shed a lot of this stuff. You're probably going to be shedding some of this, like this region of the chart. But just know that it's going to be largely dictated by like your stack size and how that compares to the rest of the field. And it'll get a lot tighter if you're kind of like a middling stack versus get wider if you're a big stack. Cool. Okay. So let's just take a look at the last two, which is 14 and 10 big blinds. So, yeah, so 14 big blinds. So you see it starts to go a little up in terms of VPIP. Now you no longer you just don't have enough to have like a functional 3-bet strategy. So it's basically you either call or you all in. So your all in is kind of getting condensed a bit more to, again, some of your better pairs. So this looks pretty similar. And then it's just adding a bit more of like, the ace 5, ace 4. Now it's adding ace 3, it's adding queen 10 suited. But otherwise looks pretty similar from like an all in strategy. Yeah, so I think not too different from the last one. And then this one is at 10 big blinds. So yeah, the main thing here is actually your VPIP goes down, and that's largely because like now you're just so shallow that like putting in another big blind is like literally 10% or more of your stack. So that becomes like a lot more valuable to preserve every single big blind that you have. But overall, you're still playing 63% VPIP, which is overall pretty high. You're actually going all in a little bit less. It's similar. It's like 7% versus like 6.5%. You're actually starting to kind of like mix in more of the like trapping with the queens, jacks, and aces because getting a double up is extremely valuable. So now you kind of want to mix in a few more traps, and then let them you check, they bet, and then you can rip it or just like kind of like slow play and just like double up. But otherwise, the strategy isn't too dissimilar. Yeah. Any questions on this?
I'm still confused about why you wouldn't call all in on like double queens.
Yeah. Well, so compared to this one, where like here you're really kind of only trapping with aces. With 14 big blinds, the main difference is now you're trapping with queens and jacks. You're adding more combos to your trapping range because you're so shallow, and the value of doubling up. There's just more value in doubling up and being able to kind of like get them to just like bluff off, or even just like, I mean, they don't even necessarily have to be bluffing. They'll probably just go all in if they even hit a pair. So you're just adding more combos to the hands that you want to trap with. But I think it's also not really like a mistake if you just like, honestly, like you take pretty similar ranges between 14 bigs and 10 bigs. Just know that you're going to be like wanting to jam a lot with like, somewhere like sevens plus, like all the pairs plus. Like you can maybe remember that like you want to trap with aces and aces only, and then just keep it at that. And then you want to mix in some of these. You can take your pick of like your suited, either your suited broadways like queen 10 suited, queen 10 suited, or your ace fives and ace fours, and then choose to mix some of those in as your bluff jams. Cool. Okay. So this was now big blind versus under the gun. The next spot we're going to look on the opposite extreme is big blind versus button. So how do you think that's going to change the ranges here, big blind versus button? Do you think it's going to increase the hands that we defend with or decrease?
Yeah, I definitely think so, because they're going to be defending their button as well, right?
What do you mean defending their button?
Like playing their button. Like,
Oh,
Yeah,
because they're
positional,
going to have
good
position
positional play.
advantage on you.
yes. Yeah, so button is going to be raising a lot more than under the gun, whereas the under the gun range might have been like something like 15 to 18%. Like button is going to be like 50%. So they're going to be playing a lot more hands. So
And they're
you'll
gonna
see
have
that.
a looser range. Yeah.
So we're going to be defending quite wider. So this was I think 50 something
53,
percent.
Yeah,
Yeah, 53 something like that. When it was under the gun, but now it goes all the way up to 80%. So yeah, we just get to play like we're playing almost every hand, right? So you're only just getting like folding these like junky stuff. So this is probably more in line with I think a few of the folks who are saying they're defending like 90% of the time. And so just be careful depending on the positions of who's raising, how this fluctuates. I think this 3-betting range is probably not too surprising. Like you still see a lot of these like suited connectors. And just because like the button's going to be so wide, it's like choosing to mix in a lot more of these like maybe unexpected 3-bets just to add some more bluffs to your 3-betting range, like jack 6 suited, jack 5 suited. Some of like these off. I mean, it's a pretty hard range, honestly, to execute like in game, like exactly like this, because there's so much mixing with all like your 3-betting. So again, you can just kind of like simplify and choose. Like let's say you just know like you choose all your suited connectors. Maybe you're 100% 3-betting with all of these like suited connectors. Maybe you pick like 1 or 2 of these combos, and then like 1 or 2 of these combos, and then just simplify it to that. That's how I would do it personally. Cool. So then as we get shallower, it stays around, I mean, 77%, 80% still quite high. I think the main difference here is that once you get down to 40 bigs, you have some jams now. That's largely going to be coming from a lot of like low suited, low pairs, and then some of their like offsuit broadways. But why do you think our jams want to come from this region?
Because you want to trap with your higher ranges.
Yeah, like I mean, your best hands, like you don't want to just like jam for 40 big blinds. Yeah, that's right. Like they're almost like too good. They're too good to jam with. Whereas like these hands are kind of the ones that are more like middling equity that benefit a lot from getting like hands directly, like beating them to fold. Like you jam with fives and then they're like end up folding nines or tens or eights or sevens is a great outcome. Or you jam with ace jack off and they fold like king queen suited or like ace queen suited, hands that have like great equity against you. Yeah, so it's like kind of like your middling equity hands when you're jamming for this big. Okay, let's see. So here, yeah, so you'll see actually VPIP really starts to increase at 20 big blinds. So now you're at like you're playing almost 90% of hands, and you have a ton of jams. What do you guys notice about this range?
Actually, I have a question about the last slide.
Sure.
If you don't mind
Let's
going
go
back.
up. Yeah.
So like, let's say you're the button, you've got super premium, kings,
Okay.
queens, aces, and the big blind jams on you, and you think that they're playing some sort of tournament optimal strategy.
Sure.
Don't you
Stack
know
call.
to just call?
And this is why like studying these ranges is really important. Like not just when you are in this position, but now when you're the button, and you raise for 2 big blinds, and somebody jams for 40 big blinds in your face, and you're like, you have like tens, and you're like, oh shit, like tens, like your absolute value of your hand, you're kind of uncomfortable because 40 big blinds is a lot. But if you know the strategy and you know, like, let's say it's somebody who's like, you think is like studied, then this is like a no-brainer call. Because if this is what their range looks like, you're dominating all of these hands, and you're doing okay against all of these hands, you're dominating some of them. Like it's a very, very clear plus EV call. So yeah, if you have like a premium or you have a good hand that beats this range, then you just know that you're just supposed to call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Good question. Okay, so yeah, going to this one. Yeah, what do you guys think? What do you notice about this range and how it's changed now that we're down from 40 to 20 bigs?
Jammed a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the off combinations you jam.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Your calling range is crazy.
Yeah, so you're still calling a lot. Calling is definitely your dominant strategy, but your jamming range has like tripled from 5% to 14%. And where you're pulling in your jams from, especially against the button, is a lot of this like offsuit, now like offsuit ace X. And you'll see again this idea that like, you know, you're gonna want to more first pull from like these low offsuits before you even pull from the middling ones. Again, because like you have the straight possibilities, and then 2, you benefit when they just fold their a6, a7, etc. Yeah. So, and you're pulling from like a lot of, and it's also again like mostly like middling equity hands. You're still trapping with your premiums. These are just like they have good enough equity to jam even if you get called, and they benefit a lot if you just like take it down right now. And I think you'll basically just see more of this once you get down to 14 big blinds and then 10 big blinds. Yeah, this looks pretty similar to this one at 14 big blinds. You just have like you have a slightly tighter calling range, but otherwise looks pretty similar. And then at 10 big blinds, you're basically jamming like any ace. And actually this is a spot I think I saw like misplayed a ton in the tournaments like the last couple weeks, is that like people were just like flatting with a lot of their ace X off like 10, 11, 12 big blinds from the big blind against like a button or like late position open. This is just like a clear jam. At like 10 big blinds or less, like you're going to be wanting to jam with like basically all of your pocket pairs, every single ace X, all of your king X suited. So just know that you're like going to be jamming a lot. And when you're like coming to the big blind and you have 10 big blinds in your stack, you should be thinking in your head like, okay, what's the worst hand that I'm going to be jamming with here? I know if I see one ace, I'm going to be jamming if a late position opens. But then what's the worst hand I'm supposed to be jamming if like early position opens? And you kind of think about like the boundaries of that range, and that so by the time like it comes to you to plan the action, you already know what you're planning to do. Yeah.
Can I ask, like, do these solvers, does it change when depending what type of tournament you're playing or the opponent you're playing? Like, you know what I'm saying?
So it will change depending on the tournament, yes, because you might have different formats. This is all nine-handed, and like like there's no like bounties or anything else like that like change up the equities and the EVs. But based on the opponent, no, because this is supposed to be like theoretically like game theory optimal poker. But this also assumes you're playing against other players who are executing game theory optimal strategy. But what you want to what you want to do with this information is know, okay, what does game theory optimal poker look like? What's the right strategy in this case? And then the part of poker that you have to figure out is how many players at the table are actually playing ranges like this, and how should I adjust my range? Should I be 3-betting wider, or should I, because this guy is like whatever overdoing it, right? So now you always want to start with this as a baseline, and then you still have to play poker at the end of the day and read your opponents to understand who's actually playing like this or not, and then adjust accordingly. Cool. Okay, so that was big blind. I think next we'll go into small blind, and then playing on the small blind. Then I've got a couple quiz questions, and then we'll probably wrap up from there. Yeah, 6:50. Okay, so playing on the small blind. I think the biggest difference playing on the small blind in cash games versus tournaments is in cash games, you're almost exclusively playing like a 3-better fold strategy out of the small blind. But in tournaments, you actually have a lot more flatting out of the small blind than you would expect. And like this is largely driven by, again, the fact that there's an ante. There's just more to play for. You're getting good odds. And then you guys saw like the big blind strategy. Like the big blind is generally not going to be like 3-betting or jamming a lot, at least when you're not like super shallow. So you get away with a lot of just calling, and then the big blind is just going to complete. Because we also talked about how the big blind has to be really careful when playing multi-way. So when you also call on the small blind, they're actually supposed to be 3-betting less. And calling as well less. So it allows you to actually call from the small blind a lot more. And then I guess this is more like small blind versus big blind strategy. But like small blind versus big blind strategy, you almost have like, you just pure limp with every hand that you VPip with. And then you start to see a much bigger or significant raising strategy as stacks get shallower. And then we probably won't really get to this piece, but like once you're in the money, we starting raise like super small into big blind, and this is just based like usually because of like ICM implications, but we'll skip over that one for today. So this is small blind versus under the gun open at 40 big blinds. And yeah, so like what you'll notice, as opposed to like in cash games where you'll mostly be like 3-betting or folding, like the most prominent part of your strategy is just calling. You have like most of the hands that you're playing with, you're just going to be calling with a lot of your pocket pairs. And most of your calls are going to come from like pocket pairs and like suited hands, like decent suited hands. Especially, and I think this is the reason I feel like a lot of players miss is like suited kings, like king 6 suited, king 7 suited, king 8 suited. Once you're facing like a late position open, then you're almost calling with any suited king, and then you also got like a lot of like suited queens that you're going to be calling with, and that's largely because you can just hit like really strong flushes, and have hands that you can check raise with on backdoor flush draw, backdoor like straight draws, etc. And then you do still have like, you've got a mix of like some like all-ins with like queen jack suit, etc., but probably pretty standard like 3-betting range with your premiums. And then some of those like suited Broadway hands, some offsuit Broadway hands. Any questions on this? Small win versus the grand range. Okay, and I think this is like a 20% range, so it's still not like, it's not wide, so we're not going crazy with the hands that we're playing. Like we're still playing extremely tight out of the small blind, which is generally the case regardless of what format you're playing. But your strategy just looks a lot more like calling than it does like 3-betting. And the main thing you'll notice as you get shallower is that you're just going to start to see more and more jams out of the small blind. So more jams that are largely going to be coming from your pairs, like suited Broadways. So you see this is like 20 big blinds. And I think eventually when it gets down, you're basically, yeah, like you're almost like most of your range is just going to be jamming here, which is most of your pocket pairs, your like suited ace-x, your suited broadways, your offsuit ace-x. Yeah, like honestly, and personally, like I don't even play much of a calling range here. Like I know it's like mixing in a lot of these as like calls at like 10 big blinds, and that's largely the balance when you want to call with like your pocket aces to trap, which you can choose to do. But again, you can also just simplify by being like, I'm only gonna play all in or fold at 10 big blinds, so I'm gonna still jam with my aces, and I'm just gonna like jam with a bunch of these, maybe remove some of like the suited connectors and some of that stuff. Any questions on this one? Small blind versus under gun? Okay, cool. I think then I just have like small blind versus button, which you'll see kind of, I mean, the biggest takeaway from this is that you just get a call with a lot of hands. I think I mentioned like you get to call with a lot of these like suited queens, suited kings now, especially against the button. You'll see it's actually even mixing 3-betting in with some of those. And then as you get shallower, most of these are going to be jams. I think this is actually like these ranges are like what I actually probably study the most before going to like tournament strategy, like into a tournament, because you so often you're going to find yourself in a spot where you're like 15 big blinds, you're on the small blind, you're supposed to have like a ton of jams, especially against button, and I think a lot of players like miss this especially, right? Like they don't jam with like, I don't know, king 10 off or like queen 10 suit, or some of them will even play them as a call, which they really shouldn't be here. But like all of these like offsuit ace-x, so I know if I have 15 big blinds in the small blind and like late position raises, I'm jamming with any ace. I'm jamming with any ace. But then when you also know that when you're the button and you get jammed on by the small blind, I see a lot of people like folding like ace 9, ace 8 sometimes, when you know when so much of their like jamming range is going to come from some of those junkier hands that you dominate. Like I think like ace 8, ace 9 is like kind of the cutoff where actually it's plus EV to call in that situation. Yeah.
What does button mean again?
Button is so when you're the last person to act, you have like the puck that says like the dealer button
Yes.
on you, and then you get to like act last. So you're to the right of the small blind. So it's like button, small blind, big blind, and then all the positions like wrap around. Yeah. So button is like the most advantaged position, but because of that, on the button you're raising with a lot more hands because you have that positional advantage, which is why when you're in the small blind you get to jam like quite liberally. Like this is a very liberal jamming range against a small blind raise. Against a button raise, and that's just because the button is going to be raising so wide. Cool. Do you guys feel like you find most of these jams in game right now off 15 big blinds? I see some
I
nods.
probably don't, but
Well, I find all the ace ones for sure.
You find all the
That's
ace-x?
easy.
Yeah.
I would fold king 10 off, but now I know. Now I'm jamming.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that, if you're like one pip off, it's not that big of a deal, right? Like if you're finding king jack off and queen jack off, but you're missing king 10 off, like it's not the end of the world. But if you're like missing any of these like ace-x jams, which I think I saw a few of those like last week, especially when we were like final like 5 or 6, and people were just like folding like ace-x, and even to like a button jam for like 8 big blinds or something, which is supposed to be like any ace-x, lower pairs, but then also a lot of like king x, queen x kind of hands, especially when everyone's that shallow. Yeah, like that's just a mistake. Okay, cool. Yeah, this was at 10 big blinds. So yeah, this just kind of illustrates like how wide, well, first off as well, like the button and late position is supposed to have a lot of jams themselves from late position, especially off 14 and 10 big blinds. Like they're almost, like at 10 big blinds, they're almost exclusively playing a jamming strategy. So that situation where like somebody opens and then if they open off of 10 big blinds, that you actually don't really run into that because they're supposed to be jamming. But this is helpful to know because now you know kind of like how to structure your calling range. When somebody jams for 10 big blinds into you and you're in the big blind, and now you know like, okay, it roughly looks like that range. So like if you have a hand like a6 off, like how does that generally fare against like this range? I would say it's probably pretty close, but like obviously you're dominating like a lot of their ace-x. You're like doing okay against all of their like other like broadways, but yeah, especially if you consider that they're probably just gonna like min raise with some of their like their most premium hands like aces and kings. Okay, cool. Okay, last thing we'll just cover quickly here is just small blind versus big blind strategy, because I see this like being played wrong a ton as well, which is generally when you're in the small blind playing against the big blind, you're gonna want to have shoves at 20 big blinds or less. So you're gonna want to have shoves. So I think the main mistakes I see is that like people are folding too much out of the small blind. You're gonna want to like when everyone folds around, you're in the small blind. You're gonna be wanting to either call or raise like a decent amount of time, but then also people aren't jamming enough with the hands that they're supposed to be jamming with at this like shallow stack. So at 20 big blinds, you start shoving hands. Like again, we're picking those middling equity hands, which is usually going to start being like your offsuit ace-x and your small pairs. So like 2s through 6s, like almost all your offsuit ace-x combos are going to be jamming. They just have enough equity and they don't really play well post flop. Once you're at 15 big blinds or less, you're basically doing more shove than raising. You still are going to limp with some of your strongest hands to trap, and or raise small, but a lot of other hands will kind of like limp to trap. And then at 10 big blinds, you're basically just shoving, or you're mostly shoving. So you don't really have any more raises. So let's just take a quick look. So this is like small blind versus big blind at 20 bigs. You're playing 85% VPIP, so you're very, very rarely folding. You can see like what the hands that we're jamming with come from like all this offsuit ace-x region, like some of these like low pairs, 2s through 4s. But your most prominent strategy here is still calling, and then raising a bunch with mostly a lot of this offsuit stuff. And generally speaking, like you generally want to call more out of the small blind with your suited stuff because they just have better equity than like a lot of your offsuit stuff, which is why you'll see a lot more 3-bet or like raise bluffs out of your offsuit stuff than you will out of your suited stuff. The only suited stuff that you see kind of like bluffing is your generally your like more junky ones, but a lot of like your decent like queen, king, jack X suited are gonna just want to call because they have good equity. And then as you get shallower, now you start to see a lot more shoves. So a lot more shoves with all your offsuit ones, especially your ones that have blockers with the ace-x and the king-x. A lot of your suited hands that just have like decent equity, even if they get called. So I think that this is where like a lot of people will miss shoves off like 15 big blinds and like not shove their like suited. I mean, I think suited connectors will be like maybe a little more obvious, but I still see people missing these. Honestly, like I miss these ones a ton personally. It's still like a bit like counterintuitive, so I had to like look and say this and like remember, okay, I need to start picking some of these regions. But you definitely don't want to be missing any of your like ace-x or king-x off shoves from the small blind against big blind at like 15 big blinds or less. Yeah. Any questions on this one? Okay. And then this is just at 10 big blinds. You just have like a ton of shoves. Like these calls are all your traps. Like these are you're never folding with 7s plus. You're calling with 7s plus. They jam. They're gonna have a decent amount of jams with their ace-x, their king-x, some queen-x, and you just snap call. These are your limp folds. Like you're just gonna be limp folding with like 10-6 off. These like your limp folds, and then like you can still like limp call. Like these are kind of these are still your traps actually. King-queen suited, king-jack suited, queen-10 suited, because they're gonna jam with like queen-9, queen-8, jack-10. So you can still kind of like trap with those. Yeah, but it's a very significant jamming range at 10 big blinds. So like 50% of your hands. Okay, cool. I think I've got like a couple quiz questions, so let's go through that, and then we'll wrap up and then get into the tournament. So first is, which hands do you guys think is a pure jam on the button when you have 15 big blinds? So I'll just go down the list, or like I'll give you guys a couple seconds. But how many people you think that ace or king queen suited is a pure jam for 15 big blinds on the button? Okay, so 3 people, 4 people. What about jack 10 suited? Okay, more looks like half. Sevens. Also like half. Okay. Ace king. One person. And then 8-9 suited. Okay, like half. So it's a good mix. So yeah, basically, and we'll actually I'll flip back to the chart, but the correct answers here, which I think a lot of people got, is Jack 10 suited and 8-9 suited. So Ace King, which I think most of you guys got right, is just too good to jam here. It's great. You can just play it as a raise. Same with King Queen suited. King Queen suited is gonna mix, but King Queen suited is also just like kind of like too good. Like you kind of want to like play post flop. Sevens is also kind of falls into a similar camp. I believe it's mixing. But let's actually take a look. I think I had the range here. So yeah, this was Jack 10 suited and 8-9 suited. So these are like pure jamming. Actually, sevens is technically a pure jam as well. I mean, there's like a small sliver of red. So like if you said sevens, like that's basically there as well. I actually thought it was going to be mostly raising. But yeah, your ace king. I mean, your ace king suited is basically pure raising. What was the other one? King queen suited. It's close, but it's gonna be just like raising a 10 because they're kind of like too good. Okay, let's see this next one. Let's say the button jams all in for 15 big blinds. What hand does the big blind most want to call with? So the button jams for 15 big blinds. We're basically 15 big blinds effective in the big blind. What hands, yeah, are we gonna want to call with most? How many people think Jack 10 suited? No one? No? Okay. How many people think ace 8 off? Okay, so like half. King queen off. Okay, like maybe a quarter. And then pocket twos. Like also maybe like a quarter. So the correct C? It's actually B. And the main reason for this is it comes back to like how many hands are we dominating versus how many hands dominate us. And what are the hands that they're going to be jamming with 15 big blinds? We kind of showed how like they're going to be jamming a lot with these like middling equity hands, like low pocket pairs and a lot of ace-x. So like twos is a pretty bad call because we're losing to all of their low pocket pairs. And then we're flipping with all their ace-x. So basically we're dominating nothing.
Except ace deuce.
Except for ace deuce, that's right. So we are dominating ace deuce. Good call out. And then Jack 10, King Queen, like they're decent equity wise, but they're just not like dominating as many hands as a hand like ace 8. So again, if we go back to that board, which was like 15, this is like their opening range. So like they're jamming all this like ace x. So if we have ace 8 off, we're dominating all these combos of ace x. Like they're not actually jamming with all these like higher suited aces. So we're actually dominating most of their suited aces that they're jamming with, and then we're flipping against all of their low pocket pairs that they're jamming with. And then we're basically ahead of all this like middling region. We're only dominated by like this region right here. So we're basically dominating or doing okay against like 90% of their range. So ace 8 off is like the hand that we most likely want to call with. Okay, maybe we'll do one more because I think what time check are we at? 7:06. Okay. Under the gun opens and it folds to the small blind. Which hand does small blind want to flat with the most? So under the gun opens early. We're 100 big blinds effective. Okay. What do you guys think? Who thinks it's ace 8 off? A. Nobody?
Yeah, I'll go for it.
Okay. One person for ace 8 off. King jack off. One person for king jack off. Interesting. Okay. What about jack 7 suited? Okay. 5 people for jack 7 suited. King 5 suited. Okay. So most people think king 5 suited. Yeah, it's D. It's king 5 suited, and it comes back to, we talked about how like especially when playing on the small blind, a lot of your calls are going to come from like suited kings, some like higher suited queens, and that's largely driven by like you just get to flop like strong flushes or like draw like really really strong flushes, and they just have like these are going to be your best equity hand. It's less coming from like your offsuit hands. Okay, maybe we'll just do these last two because they're not.
I thought the king 5 suited might be a 3-bet. Jack 7 suited more flatting.
Jack 7 suited is not good enough to flat. It's
So
mostly
just
going to be a
fold, right?
fold.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jack 7 suited is going to be a fold. King 5 suited is mostly going to be a flat. It might mix in a bit of 3. Actually, no, I don't think it really is mixing in any 3 betting with King 5 suited.
This is why I deal. Don't
Well, that's why you're here for the lesson, and then you start playing. But okay, these are the last 2 quiz questions, and we'll wrap up. But when the cutoff opens off 100 bigs, what range does the button want to 3-bet pure to get all in with? So actually, this is relevant to a question that I think Derek asked earlier today. But so we're at 100 bigs. Yeah, what range of hands do we think is like good enough to get all in, basically for 100 bigs? Who thinks it's A, queens plus and ace king only? Okay, half or so. What about tens plus ace queen off? So a bit of a wider range. Okay, so a few people, and then nines plus ace 10 suited. So this is probably the widest range. Okay, so like also like a few people. So it is queens plus ace king. I think we talked about this. We were looking at the ranges earlier, and like basically for 100 big blinds plus, you don't really want to get all in unless you have queens plus ace king. Like when you're down to like 40 big blinds, then you start to get comfortable with like tens plus and ace queen off. But for 100 big blinds, it's just way too deep to get in with anything but queens plus. Okay, last question. When the button opens off 100 big blinds, the big blind wants to 3-bet these hands at a high frequency. So we looked at this range, which is big blind versus button at 100 big blinds. I'll give you guys a couple seconds to think. Actually, let me try to remember too. Okay, who thinks it's ace deuce to ace 5 suited? And we're at 100 big blinds here, by the way. 100 big blinds. So, okay, so like maybe 25%. Who thinks it's 4-5 suited to 8-9 suited? Okay, maybe like 15-20%. C, ace 8 off to ace 10 off. Okay, like 20%. And then king 9 suited to king jack suited. Okay. I feel like some people raise their hand for all of them, but like I see a lot of hands over there that raise their hand every single time. I guess you can't go wrong if you literally answer every single one. But the answer here is actually B, 4-5 suited to 8-9 suited. So out of all these hands, and we looked at this, especially when deep, your suited connectors are going to be your most classic 3-bet bluffs when you're deep, because you can make straights, you can make flushes, you have a lot of like playability post flop. Yeah, you're gonna generally see less 3-betting from like the offsuit stuff in this formation, and you'll still see some 3-betting with these other hands, but at a lower frequency compared to like your suited connectors. You're basically like pure 3-betting, especially at 100 big blinds deep. When you're like 40 big blinds and less deep, you're gonna start to see more of it from like king 9 suited, king 10 suited, queen 10 suited.
I have a query. Is it more the B, the 4-5 suited 8-9 suited, because those hands can get away to a 4-bet jam? Where the other ones are in an awkward spot and they kind of don't want to be denied their equity. Where the
I would
6-5
say
suited can actually easily fold to a jam kind of situation.
honestly, I would say almost all these hands would be pretty easy folds to a 4-bet jam, especially for 100 big blinds.
Unless it's Victor jamming.
Yes, unless it's me. Yes. So
they're all pure calls.
but no, that's not the main reason. It's just it mainly comes back to kind of like the playability. Yeah. The playability, and also a lot of these hands, you're just gonna against their calling range, you're gonna be dominated. Like they're gonna call you with ace king, ace queen, like some of those hands. Yeah, you're folding out exactly. Whereas like this, you're pretty clear of like even if they have like ace king, ace queen, like if it comes like a 9 high board or something, you just know that they're just so concentrated with like the Broadway cards. You can feel pretty comfortable with one pair and like play it safely. But yeah, well, let's go back and actually. I'll show you guys this range really quickly. I think it was, what was it? Button versus big blind, right?
Yeah.
So this is it. Yeah, so button versus big blind, you'll see like the suited connectors are almost pure 3-betting. Like you're seeing a bit of it from ace 2 to ace 5, but it's like mixing. Like pure with ace 5, you're not really seeing, I mean, you're seeing some of it with this region. Like, yeah, maybe half these, like king jack, king 10. But when you look at the suited connectors, like it's just pure 3-betting. Okay, cool. Well, that concludes this class. Thanks, guys. We're gonna get into the tournament.